Hey everyone, Nick Yuskevich here with Daily Fantasy Winners. Got the next edition of Tee to Green here for you. And this is for the Dean Deluca Invitational, a tournament that's played in Fort Worth, Texas. Kind of the second tournament of a little mini back-to-back swing in Texas, if you will, that connects the dots from the Players' Championship to the Memorial Tournament. The Memorial Tournament's Jack Nicklaus's tournament, his invite, which is a huge tournament. All the best players usually play in that one. And so this is kind of so I only bring this up just because even though we're kind of getting into the thick of things here in the golf season with the Players, the Memorial, the U.S. Open in only a few weeks from now, this is kind of one of those tournaments that, you know, at least in this day and age, it kind of connects the dots, if you will. It'll be a bit of a weaker field this week in the tournament. It's also actually, interestingly enough, though, it is a little bit of a smaller field this week as well. But that's usually the case. Usually PGA Tour tournaments are about 140 to 150 players, but the Dean Deluca Invitational is usually only about 120 players. I think it's probably just because it's an invitational. Although I'm not exactly sure how many or what the exact qualifications for are it, but just given it's a little bit of a weaker tournament. But nevertheless, it's a smaller field, only about 120 players. And I bring this up because obviously you want to get 6 of 6 guys through to make it through the cut, obviously. But this is absolutely a week you're going to want that if you're wondering about lineups that are borderline going to cash. And I say this because even though we have a smaller field that's down to 120 players instead of 140 to 150, the cut is still top 70 plus ties. It's not like the cut's top 60 plus ties now or something. So we're just cutting fewer players after Friday's round. So that's definitely a big reason why. And then also there's some pretty good odds per dollar plays out there. And there's just several kind of top to bottom. And so it should be easier in that sense as well. So definitely advise getting 6 of 6 through the cut this week in all formats. And so a couple other things. This used to be the Crown Plaza Invitational. It's the same tournament. It's just a different name. I think it's only been the Dean and DeLuca. This is the second year of it. It's the second or third year. I think it's only the second year of Dean and DeLuca. And so just say if you're doing course research, Crown Plaza Invitational is the old name for it, or the most recent old name for it. I'm sure it's gone through more name changes than that. Winning score here, usually, it's similar to last week. It's usually about, 12 to 16 under, kind of somewhere in that range. It's a pretty scoreable course for these guys. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it for details about the golf tournament. And so let's just dive right on into some details about the golf course. This is at Colonial Country Club, a course that is a par 70 and tips out, I have 7,204 yards. I've seen several different distances out there, and I swear it changes every year. It really doesn't matter that much. It's between 71 and 7,200 yards, basically. And tournament officials will always move the tee boxes around, day to day, so it's never going to be the exact distance every day. And it's a 100-yard difference is not a big deal. And so it's about average distance, though, either way for a par 70. Since it is a par 70, we have 2 par 5s, holes 1 and 11. Number 11 is like 635 yards. Don't have to worry about eagles there. There will be maybe 1 or 2 that happen on a hole out, or maybe a bomber gets the 20-mile-an-hour wind downwind and somehow it does it perfectly. I don't know. But just don't have to worry about it for hole 11. Hole 1, though, that's 565 yards. That is a hole there we'll see about 10 to 12 eagles probably. That's usually the average here. And so, but when I was looking up over the last handful of years to see what kinds of golfers make eagles there, like, do you need to be a longer hitter, essentially? You don't need to be a longer hitter. Yes, the longer hitters have a slight advantage, like they will on a par 5 of any distance, but they really don't have a huge advantage here. Most of the time, the medium-length hitters can get here in 2, and even sometimes some of the shorter hitters you make eagle here. So, and especially since we're only worried about, we're dealing with like 10 to 12 eagles total here, just not a big deal. So, would not worry about driving distance for eagles, and I especially won't worry about driving distance here as we get more into the strategy building. So that's another reason why I'm bringing it up now. A few other details about the golf course, though, before we get into the strategy. This is a tighter golf course. It's a Colonial Country Club. It's an older course, heavy tree-lined fairways. So not older courses usually are going to end up having tighter fairways. There are also not a lot of penalty strokes on this golf course. I want to touch on this just very briefly. There is some water on this course. Doesn't really come into play that much. It comes into play less than even last week. It probably comes into play in like 4 or 5 holes, and that might even be stretching it a little bit, actually. And there is out of bounds that comes into play on a couple holes. But I wanted to touch on out of bounds specifically here just briefly because kind of gotten into a couple interesting conversations with some DFS people recently about out of bounds. There is something that it's not like a huge deal from a DFS standpoint, but if you're new to daily fantasy golf, or even more important, well, I mean, this is daily fantasy, but if you're just new to golf in general, or maybe you're a casual player that goes out and plays like a handful of times a year, and you're used to just playing on your local muni courses and like best shot tournaments, or maybe you're just going out with your buddies and playing, whatever it might be, and you just haven't had the chance or the opportunity to play like a bunch of nice courses, or even a couple nice courses. Maybe you're just not that familiar with it. It's not this way every single time, but most of the time, the newer the golf course or the nicer the golf course is, the more likely, or the less likely, it's less likely that out of bounds will be in play. The worse golf course you're on, or the older golf course you're on, it's more likely that out of bounds is going to be in play. And you might think, like, well, wait a minute, why shouldn't, like, the professional golfers or the people that are really good at golf have to deal with more, like, difficulty, essentially? And yes, the nicer the golf course, or the newer the golf course is, it's more likely that golf course is going to be tougher than your average muni, and that's true. But from the out-of-bounds standpoint, it's actually reversed. And you might wonder, like, okay, why is that? If you're... all the old golf courses, you can go back to before 1900, if you will, or even in the early to mid 1900s, doesn't matter. As long as it was before like the big technology boom of golf over the last like 20 to 30 years, a lot of golf courses were built of shorter length, and they were probably also built on smaller pieces of property. I'm guessing a lot of times, like all of you have probably, you probably live at least near a golf course, or in a town with a golf course, or, you're like, you have a golf course at least nearby to some extent that's a crappy course, or it's just an average course where, the length of the course is like, even like 6,200 yards or something like that. And my guess is there's some holes where it's like you're at the edge of the property or something like that. And you have a golf hole that's like, let's say it's like a 370-yard par 4, and it's just straight away. You're going to have to your right a 5 to 10-yard strip of rough, and you're going to have like tree line trees like running through the middle of the rough, and then on the other side of that 5 to 10 yards of rough is a fairway for another golf hole, basically, maybe like coming back the other way, essentially, just running parallel next to one another. So it's like, it's one of the situations where if you like blow your shot like way right or something, like you're just hitting it onto another golf hole. But maybe if you're going left, you'll have like a 5-yard section of rough to the left of the fairway, and then you'll have a cart path, and then like right on the other side of the cart path you have out of bounds stakes, or you'll have like a public road or something like that. Because a lot, like I said, these golf courses like that are older, or that are worse, were probably built on smaller pieces of property, so out of bounds comes into play a lot more easily. But they're probably like shorter holes, and you could just aim way right to avoid the out of bounds if you want to, and that makes it easier. And I'm only just bringing this up in terms of like the PGA stuff, that like if there is out of bounds that comes into play on a PGA Tour course, it is going to be most likely way out of play, or you're going to have to hit a really errant shot like offline. Or it's also probably not good. Like there's only gonna be like 1 or 2 instances of this, or like maybe a few instances, I don't know, but it's usually pretty far offline. The only time I can think of where it really was a big deal to consider was at the U.S. Open at Marion back in 2013, the tournament that Justin Rose won, and they narrowed some of the fairways, and they moved them even closer to out of bounds stakes. Like Sergio, I remember on one par 4 on the back 9 hit like 4 balls out of bounds off the tee, made like a 12. So like that was good, and then he wasn't the only one. So there was that tournament, but other than that, like it's on the PGA Tour, it's just out of bounds barely comes into play. So I only bring that up because sometimes I think some people do look at out of bounds as like a big deal, maybe on the PGA Tour. It's not a big deal at all. It's more you're looking at for water hazards, or like lost ball situations where you have like really high fescue. That's really where it's only going to come into play. Anyway, sorry, that was a little bit of a tangent. And so tighter course, it's an older course, not a lot of penalty strokes. The greens are on the small side, and they're somewhat easy greens just by PGA standards. And so I use this to feed into the strategy standpoint. Strokes gained putting is probably the number one. It is the number one thing that pops up from the statistical angle, and driving accuracy comes up as well. Now, there's 2 points I have to make here with this as well, so bear with me here for a second. Again, like I said, the easier the golf, like I've said in the past, the easier the greens are to putt on, the more putting's going to matter. because the harder the greens, the more variance will come into play, which makes it more unpredictable, which means the statistic's not going to matter as much. So that's basically what that means for the stroke gained putting. But the 2 points again. This field does not have many bombers, and the bombers that are in this field, outside of like Bud Cauley and Tony Finau, and they're not, I wouldn't call them superstars, or at least yet I would, they're young rising stars. Outside of them, though, there really aren't any, like, there are no superstar bombers, like, in this field. Like, Dustin Johnson, Jason Day, Rory McIlroy, well, Rory's injured, but you get what I'm saying here. All those guys, they're not in this field. So the stars that usually, like, the superstars in golf, or like the top 50 players, and, you know, we'll just say that, they have usually a lot more flexible scheduling, that they're able to schedule just kind of what they want. So they'll play in the major championships, they'll play in the WGCs, and they'll usually pick like some other tournaments that more fit their style, meaning like longer golf courses where length's going to come more into play. And so I only say this in that it's so the reason why strokes gained putting is showing up is because there are a lot of golfers that do rank well in strokes gained putting here usually every year, like in the past. Like, it's not a surprise that strokes gained putting shows up here, but at the same time you still want to focus on the strokes gained putting element because it's showing up enough to the point where it is a statistic you want to focus on. I hope that made sense. It means just that there are obviously a lot of good putters in this field, so it's no kidding that it's going to show up here when you look at past results, but it is showing up enough in comparison to the other statistics that you should still be looking at that for your picks. That's the clearest way I can say it. And then the second thing that I wanted to elaborate on was to the driving accuracy angle. This came up in the forum last week, and it was a really good question. And it was just asking about driving accuracy, and this is a very, basically, and he was asking me about the statistic good drive percentage. And driving accuracy is still something that's definitely debated on, like, how worthwhile is it and what statistics are better than driving accuracy for this. And it kind of comes up this week, so it's a great time to dive into this. And I won't spend too much time on it. I can do a strategy video on it in the future, but I wanted to touch on it here. There are two ways you can get a better metric than driving accuracy, in my opinion. There is other outside of the strokes gained statistics. The first thing you can do instead of using just plain old driving accuracy is to combine driving accuracy with drive distance from the edge of the fairway, or from the edge of the rough. That's what I meant to say, the edge of the rough. The reason why you want to do that is driving accuracy just takes all drives on par 4s and par 5s and whether you hit the fairway or not, and that's it. But if you combine it with drive distance from the edge of the rough, what it will do is essentially say, okay, you're missing the fairway. When you're missing the fairway, you're not missing it by very much, or you're missing it by a lot, because obviously when you miss the fairway by a couple yards, it's not going to be a big deal. But if you're missing it a lot by 20 yards, that's not good at all. You're probably in the woods, or you got trees in your way, or in the water, something like that. So that's one way you can do it. The other way you can do it is by looking at good drive percentage. Good drive percentage, the way that's calculated is taking all par 4s and par 5s drives if you're hitting the fairway, but it will also combine that with all greens in regulation if your drive was in the rough. And what that's designing to do is taking, obviously, accurate drives off the tee, but it will also say, well, if you're hitting the greens in regulation, even when you miss the fairway, that means you probably hit some drives that were good misses, essentially, and you're able to put it on the green. There is some gray area. There is some, it's good reasoning. It's just not great reasoning, I guess, only in that it's perfectly plausible that you hit a really bad drive, like on a 380-yard par 4, and you just hit a miserable drive, but it went 20 yards into the rough, but since there's no trees over there, yeah, you're fine, you could still hit it on the green. Or it's but still you hit a pretty bad drive, and or it's flawed in the sense that you can be, and this is what I hate about greens and regulation statistic, is that a lot of these courses, the greens are massive, and usually if you're on golf courses that have massive greens, that usually means they're not heavily wooded. Usually, like, the smaller the greens, that means they're probably country club style courses where you have heavy tree line fairway type of deals. And so if you're on bigger greens that are more open, if there aren't as many trees blocking it, that just means to me that, like, oh, so if I pull my drive into the rough, like, by 15 yards, and the pin's in the front, I catch a flyer lie and it like hits the middle of the green and rolls to the just inside the back edge, and I'm 70 feet away from the hole. That means I hit a good. That means I get rewarded for good drive percentage. So it's like, you know, they're both better than just looking at plain old driving accuracy, but they're still not like that great of ways of detecting it. So I just recommend to people like that use all of that to your disposal when you're measuring good drivers at the golf ball. And obviously strokes gained off the tee is a perfectly fine way of doing it as well. But that also will reward a lot of distance and doesn't reward accuracy as much as well. So you're just kind of combining all these different things when you're taking a look at the things that are necessary for it. So hopefully that makes enough sense to everybody. I just don't think there's a driving statistic that's like perfected yet, if you will. So that's done for the statistics angle. This is a turn. Oh, like I already pointed this out. So recent performance. There's two final things. Recent performance. Obviously, you want to use that every week. I always use around this time of the year. I always tell people to be careful about recent performance because we have like 4 straight months of golf we can go off of now, or 4.5 months, if you will, since basically the the SBS Tournament of Champions at Kapalua back in the beginning of January. We have enough tournaments where everybody's looking at recent performance. But I also, this is for especially important for the new people that are a little bit new to DFS, a tournament where you finish T10 in, like if you finish T10 in the Masters compared to T10 in the SBS Tournament of Champions, the T10 in the Masters is astronomically more valuable than the T10 at the SBS Tournament of Champions, because the Masters is obviously one of the biggest tournaments of the year in a major championship, and the SBS Tournament of Champions is only like a 30-person field, and it's just the champions from the previous year. So I would tell people that are new to DFS, be careful with recent performance when you're using that, and try and make sure you understand like which tournaments are the best or have the best fields in them when you're using recent performance in your evaluation. And even for the more experienced players, it's a good thing just to kind of maybe not just refresh on, but just make sure you're paying attention to it at this time of year. And because this is the time of year where a lot of people start using recent performance even more, just because people are more in the flow of things and the heat of golf season is picking up. Last thing that's interesting about strategy for this week. It has to do with ownership. If you go to our odds per dollar sheet on DailyFantasyWinners.com, you will see that, like Jon Rahm and Jordan Spieth are both about 12-1 to win the tournament this week, and they're the favorites, and Sergio's right up there as well, I think. But odds per dollar wise, they're only like above a 6.0. Jon Rahm's a 7.1 actually. But if you go down all the way to like the 6,900 range, into 6,900, you'll find some people that are above a 2.0. It's just to say that there's really good odds per dollar from top to bottom all the way through. And I just think that ownership is going to be really thinned out this week, with the exception maybe a couple players near the top. And it's going to be really tough to predict ownership this week. I think there's going to be a lot of varying opinions, because some people still want to, forget the strategy of the course and just say, oh, I want guys that make a lot of birdies and go for the bombers. And there'll be people that'll be following more stuff what I'm saying, as far as you want the accuracy, more the accurate type of guys, and the people who are good putters. And then the people follow the recent performance and the good odds. It's just because the odds is playing out the way it is, and you're seeing some of the names that are available around that 7K range. It's really going to be spread out, I think, this week. And so it's going to be tough to predict the ownership this week. I don't think I'm going to have any recommendations to fade people this week, if I have to guess just by looking at it right now. I'm going to dive in a little bit more into it as we get here over the next day or two. But my guess is there won't be anybody. And if there is, it'll just be one person. Weather. Right now, Thursday morning is supposed to have potentially some lower winds. When I say lower winds, I mean like around 10 miles an hour, because Thursday afternoon, all day Friday, and even parts over the weekend, which doesn't matter, there's going to be like 20-mile-an-hour winds. It's going to be a very windy golf tournament. If you're somehow using a model out there, you can throw a wind element into it if you're able to incorporate wind scoring into your model. But I say that for like the FantasyLabs people who are using that. I know they incorporate it. So that's just one thing to pay attention to. I'm recording this on a Monday evening. The timing of wind can change drastically between Monday night and Wednesday night. So don't worry about it too much right now, but definitely pay attention to it when we get closer to Wednesday night, because Thursday morning, Friday afternoon potentially could have a little bit of an advantage over the Thursday afternoon, Friday morning wave. And so we'll worry about that then on the forum. And then on to the picks. Sorry, this is a much longer video than I intended it to be this week. I thought this was going to be a quick one. So the picks. There are 5 guys above 10K this week. There's really, it's probably a better way of looking at it is that Jordan Spieth's 12K, Jon Rahm's 11.8, and then we have a little bit of a drop off to Sergio at 10.8, Casey at 10.2, and Kuchar at 10.1, and like several people in the 9K range. As far as cash goes, I would start with Jon Rahm or Sergio. They're both driving the ball just absolutely phenomenally. I mean, they both have distance, which is nice too, but that's not even so much the intent. Their recent form is just fantastic. They're driving it accurately. They're just fantastic ball strikers. Jon Rahm will be probably the most owned person. Everybody loves Jon Rahm. And given the quality of this field, I don't think people are going to mind paying 11.8K for him this week. Plus there's enough good options in the cheaper end of things this week that you can roster Jon Rahm, I think, still relatively comfortably. And if you're asking me, would I rather roster Jon Rahm or Jordan Spieth in cash, I'm taking Jon Rahm. Not because of Jordan Spieth missing the cut last week, but I do think Jon Rahm's ball striking is just better than Jordan Spieth's is. And I would trust him a little bit more on the consistency angle of making the cut, as crazy as that sounds. I'm just going to say this really quickly about Jon Rahm. I am still blown away about what he's doing, and I seriously mean this. As far as rookies on the PGA Tour, I mean, some people, yeah, they'll start on the international tours, like, or the European Tour, and they'll come over later, so it's not exactly a fair comparison. But for somebody who is a rookie on the PGA Tour, you know, at a young age starting to play professional golf, I have never, at least in my lifetime, see someone be this impressive this early. And that, other than, you know, look, Tiger Woods won the Masters in 97, so Tiger might be like the only exception to this. But even Tiger, like back in like 97 or 98, whenever he exactly turned pro, he missed like a couple cuts in there. Like he showed like some inconsistencies in there. And Rahm, I guess, to be fair, is showing a little bit of inconsistency too, but it is minimal. I mean, it is insane statistically what he is doing right now in all the strokes gained areas versus the field. I've just never seen anything like it, and so it's hard to just just sit here and to say, oh no, fade Jon Rahm or just limit your exposure. No, I'm not going to do that in this field, at least this week. So I think he's your best option along with Sergio for cash and GPPs for that matter. Sergio, well, they'll both have decent ownership, obviously. Jordan Spieth's good at GPPs. I wouldn't worry about too much about the missed cut last week. He made a 9 on that one par 5 toward the end before missing the cut. It is what it is. He was the defending champ here. He's from Texas. He's got good familiarity with this tournament. He's got good course history and all that. It's a weak enough field. I just wouldn't worry about it too much. He's fine in GPPs. And then as far as the 9K range, I will just say there are several good decent options in here, but I do think Kevin Kisner is the best option at the 9K range at 9,700. He will probably be the most used player in the 9K range, in my opinion. But I just think he is the best, though, just because he correlates very well to the strokes gained putting angle. He's a very good striker of the golf ball right now. He's a little bit on the shorter angle, but he's very accurate off the tee. He's got great form and everything like that fits the course well. So, even if he's like 25% owned, that's fine. It's for Kisner in this field. I think that's perfectly fine this weekend. So, anyways, sorry again. That was a longer video, and I apologize for last week about the really late arrival of the video last week. That was completely my bad. I screwed up on several fronts, and I ran into a lot of obstacles last week that not worth getting into. Just a lot of utility malfunctions from the power and the AC unit causing a little bit of flooding. So in any case, but that's all taken care of. And so I'm doing this on a Monday night. This better be up by Tuesday or like Wednesday morning at the absolute worst in any case like that. So in any case, thank you for watching. Good luck this week. You can follow me on Twitter at Nick Yuskevich. Daily Fantasy Winners is on Twitter at DFantasyWinners, and then of course, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We appreciate it. All right, good luck everybody.